Hello, online audience. Thank you for coming. Before we get to Gary Wyatt's presentation, Emily Ball, who is the new outreach committee chair on the MnSTAC board, has just a few announcements to let you all know about.
Hi, everyone. Happy Thursday. Just a couple of announcements. Number one, in my role as the outreach committee chair, we are part of the outreach is outreach to members. But also the committee has felt really strongly that we should be doing some outreach to the public as well. So this is just my request. If you have any ideas for needs related to outreach to the public and or members, to reach out and contact me. My email is eball@wsbeng.com, or other ways that we're connected. So that's my request to anyone who's listening. And then I just wanted to share a few updates. So the IRA, or Inflation Reduction Act, funding has been announced. And that's that exciting $1 billion dedicated to urban and community forestry that's passing through to the U.S. Forest Service. Of that $1 billion, $38 million is coming to Minnesota, and some of the recipients include Hennepin County, Great River Greening, some cities within Minnesota. So just wanted to share that with you all, the excitement of all the funding for urban and community forestry. And then the other piece that I wanted to just remind everyone is that the Shade Tree Program bonding grants from the Minnesota via the Minnesota DNR Forestry, that deadline is coming up on October 2nd. So if you have needs for tree removal and replacement, that's a great opportunity. The relief grant deadline just passed on Monday. So this is the next up grant opportunity. So those are my announcements. And with that, I think we'll kick off the presentation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, so now we're going to invite Gary Wyatt, Extension Educator down here in Blue Earth County and Regional Office.
Yeah.
And hopefully a lot of you have seen Gary throughout the years. Agroforestry. I will mention one of the top 5 most highly saluted speakers from last year's Shade Tree Short Course.
Oh, really?
If I haven't told you.
Very good. I'm not. You're
Speaking
not.
on food forest.
So I'm invited next year, maybe, too?
You know, the invitation's always open, Gary. Always. Of course. But today to speak about living snow fences.
Yes.
So with that, I'll just let you take it away.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. And it's great to be here. Thank you, Emily, for that. And yeah, I hope some of you had the opportunity to fill out some of those grants. Bushels load of money's coming from Washington or from whatever. It's just great to participate in that. And obviously we have a lot of ash trees that are going to need to be removed very nearly in the future. And yeah, that money's going to help out a lot. My name is Gary Wyatt. I'm Extension Educator here in Mankato Regional Office. I service the state with our forestry team. Many of you have probably heard of Angela Gupta at Rochester. She's my coworker, and our supervisor is Eli Sagor up in Cloquet and St. Paul campus. And then we have other, Jeff Jackson's up at Cloquet, and he's going to work at actually seed sourcing and looking at seed migration for forests. And in fact, that's pretty interesting stuff. But I'm going to talk about living snow fences. My expert is agroforestry. I do have one slide on agroforestry. For those of you that don't know what that is, you can jot down there's 5 practices of agroforestry, and maybe we'll quiz you at the end of the day. But I've got tons of slides, as Ryan knows, and anybody that's heard me talk, I usually have a ton of slides. So if you'd like a copy of my slide presentation, I will PDF it and send it to Ryan, and you can look at some of the data, some of the information later. I've actually used some of Dan Gullickson's slides. Oh, first of all, my specialization is agroforestry and also invasive species on the terrestrial end of it, not aquatics, but just terrestrial. That's EAB. That's also the buckthorn issues and any woodies in the woods and so forth, and woodlands. I've invited Dan Gullickson to be a part of this too, and he's here today in Mankato. He's the MnDOT Snow Fence Coordinator. I think that's your proper title, Dan. And Dan's here to help answer questions at the end. So I'm going to rattle through a lot of these slides, and we'll talk about living snow fences. I do have a lot of slides, some slides on windbreaks. So windbreaks is a part of that's one practice of agroforestry, and windbreaks is a living snow fence. So here's kind of my outline for today. Current funding programs for living snow fences with NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service with USDA, Soil Water Conservation District, and then MnDOT. Design of windbreaks and living snow fences, and they're kind of synonymous, but mainly our living snow fences are maybe 1 or 2 rows of a living snow fence or plantings, and we have, for windbreaks, maybe more plantings if we're protecting a building site and so forth. And then we're going to go for some research that I'm going to use some of Dan's slides from the MnDOT research and U of M research that we've done on the past. And then also MnDOT living snow fences. He's got some pictures there I want to show. And then we'll get into some trees and shrubs used for living snow fences, and then resources at the end. Okay, so funding real quickly. So you've got several resources at the county level for our landowners or professionals out in greater Minnesota or even in the Twin Cities. So Soil and Water Conservation District, Natural Resource Conservation Service, there's an office in every county. There's also a county extension office in every county as well, but there might not be a man or woman, by a staff person in extension that can help you with ag or horticulture. So some of our local extension educators, the county commissioners, have bought into that program, and we have about 20 local extension educators around the state. But usually every county has a soil water and also Natural Resource Conservation Service office in each county, so be aware of that. So Natural Resource Conservation Service, the NRCS we call it, all these acronyms, and so I tried to spell out most of them. Environmental Quality Incentive Program is EQIP. That's certainly a payment for a living snow fence. It's per lineal foot, and that may vary by county, so be sure to contact your Natural Resource Conservation Service in your county and see if that figure, or what that figure might be, and that covers for planting and I think weed matting and some other possibly tree tubes and other types of things. So, and that may vary by county. Probably the biggest program that is and most beneficial for most of our landowners and farmers in the state is Conservation Reserve Program, CRP. It's a 10 to 15 year program. It can possibly be extended after the contract is over. And so another 10 or 15 years onto that, and certainly if it's a planting of a tree or shrub, then that's what you want. Payments are based on county land rental rates. So wow, we're talking about $200, $250 per acre per year for that type of program, even if it's not producing corn and soybeans, and you've got that in the program. So be aware of that. And then actually the establishment, they've gone from a cost share program to basically pay up to 50% of the planting. That's trees, weed mats, and water, and maybe tree tubes too. So it's a really dynamite program. So if you're working with landowners in rural Minnesota or even in the Twin Cities, they can participate in this program or see if they can qualify for this program, and then look at that type of payment over years. And then obviously you've got that establishment of trees and shrubs in the ground for a long period of time. SWCD, Soil Water Conservation Districts, each county has one. And then depending on state programs and grants that they have coming through their office and through the Board of Water Soil Resources, another BWSR, another acronym, Board of Water Soil Resources fund a lot of these programs and may offer cost share programs for tree planting. So check out your county SWCD office and see what they offer. And then certainly the offices are usually together in that county office, and you can kind of go across from one office to the other and see what kind of programs they offer. So this is like a schematics of a CRP planting possibly. We're looking at maybe actually two plantings. So one shrub row planting for a catch row, 100 feet away from the native native forbs, and then, or it could be farmed actually in through there, but not paid for CRP. And then 2 to 3 rows of shrubs, and then obviously 150 feet from the roadway or 200 feet away from the roadway could be a CRP planting in native forbs, and that could be a payment of CRP as well. So actually, if we don't farm this in between here, I noticed some farmers do that, but we could actually have this whole piece from this shrub row and in between here, the catch row, then another catch row here. All this could be a CRP planting. And MnDOT has worked with NRCS around the state of Minnesota for memorandum of agreement, and they work with some of the maintenance and so forth that landowners might have, and there's some funds available there too. And Dan can talk about that at the end. So MnDOT's program, these are some nice snow pictures here. Just a reminder that might be coming up. So actually, years ago, MnDOT staff their administration started to pay landowners for leaving standing corn rows or planting living snow fences on their property to protect a state highway. There's over 3,700 sites that MnDOT has designated as problem snow sites. So these are some of the ones, I think I've got another slide on that too. Here's standing corn rows. This is like a 12-row strip of corn. This is looking west. And you see how much snow that collects. That's just an awesome picture there. You put a rock out in the middle of a cornfield in the wintertime, it's going to grow snow, okay? Snow drift is going to form behind it. So you put anything out there. Here, this is the Highway 30 going west. It's right north of Mountain Lake in Cottonwood County. And then I think this is another county that's close there, but obviously spruce trees catching lots of snow. Those are nice to snowmobile over, and obviously if you're a kid, to dig tunnels in maybe and so forth. And then here's a living snow fence. It's got some shrub rows at first, and then some conifer plantings on the south side or the leeward side. So who can't say that they can walk on corn stalks? This is a picture that was taken in Brown County, I believe, or Nicollet County, and this was a payment made by MnDOT and protecting this highway to the east. This is a west side planting, obviously, that the farmer left standing corn rows. And living snow fences in Minnesota, on average, is 17 times more cost efficient than removing snow on roadways. I think that's still true. Okay. So most of the programs that they pay farmers for on MnDOT is for structural snow fences, which is very effective and more permanent, certainly. And then standing corn rows and hay bales, and then also for living snow fences. And then grading, if they're looking at remodeling or revamping or restoring new highways or revamping existing highways, there's a lot of grading that can be done to reduce snow on highways. And this is the contact. I think I have this contact information later in the presentation at the resources, but Dan's information is right here. And then also this is a Z-link that goes to their site. I think you click on the MnDOT District Snow Fence Coordinator, and it goes to this page. So this page, MnDOT, or Z-links at the University of Minnesota basically is a shorter hyperlink, okay? It's z.umn.edu/MnDOT-LSF. Quite convenient. There we go. Okay, windbreak and living snow fence design. Real quickly, I'll go through these. Oh, here's our quiz for the end of the day. 5 practices of agroforestry. Obviously, our biggest practice in Minnesota is windbreaks. Probably our second being silvopasture. We have a lot of nonprofit groups like Sustainable Farming Association promoting silvopasture. That's managing livestock, understory, and trees in a woodland area, or you can have an open pasture and you plant some trees in it, like I have in St. James, where I live. I've planted some chestnut trees in my open pasture, so that's a silvopasture. Ollie cropping, there's not much done in corn soybean country, but in Wisconsin I noticed there's a hazelnut planting and then asparagus planting in between in the alley there. So that could certainly be done in Minnesota and some of the marginal lands. Forest farming is kind of ginseng and shiitake mushrooms, and then repairing forest buffers. So the reason for windbreaks, obviously, is for wind, and then snow management, maybe 50%, but wind is certainly is a problem in the wintertime when it snows, and certainly is an issue, so that's why people establish windbreaks. So there's a lot of different windbreaks. There's field windbreaks, here's shelter belt, farm shelter belt windbreaks, here's living snow fences, here's maybe a specialty crop that's protected by windbreaks. Communities, rural communities have living snow fences around them, and obviously our cattle yards or feedlot yards can be protected in the wintertime from snows in the livestock areas. This is a swine barn that I wanted to just highlight. This is one of our ones in Wyatt County that's expanded, actually. He's taken out some of these other spruce trees here, but this is a very big planting, 25 feet between these rows, but here's a honeysuckle row on the windward side of the planting, obviously, that catches the first drifts, and then some smaller trees, deciduous trees, and I think these are maples or ash. Obviously, ash is being a problem this year with them, obviously in future years too, with emerald ash borer, but then some spruce trees in the inner side. But basically, 150 feet to 200 feet is usually our recommended remediation for protection zone. And actually, this particular farmer farmed between the barns, actually, and the snow fence until he expanded and then built some more barns in that area. So the big thing about windbreaks and living snow fences is H. H is the height of the planting. So whatever the height of the planting is, usually about 10 times the height of the planting is the protected area. So here's a couple of notes here on, so wind is reduced in the leeward side by 10 times the height of the planting, as I just mentioned. And then obviously some reduction of wind occurs within 25 or even more feet of the height of the planting. And then all depending on density, shape, height, spruce, cedar, maple, deciduous tree, conifer, shrub type versus tree type, all is dependent on that protection area from the wind. Plant perpendicular, obviously the wind direction, and I've got a few slides on our predominant wind in the winter months. So with a little study in North Dakota, or South Dakota, excuse me, at north and west and east windbreak in southwest South Dakota could cut fuel consumption up to 40%. And that's with a farm shelter belt. So these are neat little designs and could be with windbreaks, with living snow fences. We have obviously some wind going through the planting and most of the wind going over or around it. And it's just interesting to see that we do have a wraparound or an edge effect, and I've got another slide to show that around these living snow fences or shelter belts that we need to be concerned about. This is just a slide that shows a little bit different planting that most people do. So here's shrubs and then conifers and then deciduous trees. So a lot of times we'll have shrubs, deciduous trees for the snow catch area to drift on and not break limbs on. And then we have the conifer planting on the inside protected zone. So I wanted to show this as a different type of planting. And maybe that's a southern type planting with less snow. Windbreak density and porosity is a big thing. So windbreak density is the ratio of solid portion of the barrier to the total area of the barrier. So density, think of solid. That's whatever you can see in the wintertime, whatever you see in the summertime, that's density. Porosity is the open areas, okay? And that's just the terms. So we have different windbreaks providing different functions if they're planted to different species. And especially if you want winter cover and winter protection, you're obviously going to go with some type of a conifer that's going to keep its needles and so forth, keep its structure. Actually, we do have some winter protection with deciduous trees, but not as much unless you have some shrub rows that really catch some maybe some snow. And then obviously you want to, maybe a thicker berry would be planting some conifers. But you can see we have a lot of different types of barriers here. And then multiple rows is always helpful if you want to really protect your site. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I just wanted to show you the height and density on some of these. This is a solid fence here. Basically wind goes over the top, not much, 10 to 12 H. And then you do have a little bit of snow coming on the leeward, on the windward side of these plantings as well. And here's the Wyoming fence that goes through a little bit, but then it obviously mainly drifts on the backside. And then a vertical slanted fence. Then we have one shrub row, certainly gathers snow on both sides. If we have just a single tree, the wind's going to go through that until it mounds up enough to then make drifts. But otherwise, you're not going to be protecting much of the landscape with snow protection there. And then obviously multiple plantings, conifer plantings. Then here's on the bottom side a trip row here for shrubs that snow would gather in between the conifer planting, and like a spruce planting would further protect the area downwind. So our prevailing winds in the wintertime, northwest winds in November to March, and in the summertime, April to October, is basically the southeast winds. So that's a word of note. And this is a nice little pictorial here. So I'll ask maybe Dan and Emily here to see what is this red line here? What do you think that might be?
It looks like the old corn cribbing fencing.
Yes, it's a snow fence with lath in it, right? Red lath, and I don't know if anybody's old enough, besides Dan and myself, to remember those. I think I've got one in my grove that's deteriorating. I need to remove. But yes, and so actually, so here they planted this on this new house development. They planted this living snow fence or a windbreak, basically, to protect this house. And found out later that, wow, maybe we had snow. Actually, with the wraparound effect, the snow actually came around here and dumped snow right there in the driveway and right here in the yard. So we had to do a little snow fence here and try and protect this long driveway. And then obviously we have little dots of green that extended the living snow fence and the windbreak. So I thought that was a kind of a neat little picture. Again, we need to be aware of the wraparound effect and a wraparound effect on our roadways. So if we talk about living snow fences, sometimes our farmers may, and I think our SWCD knows this too, you really got to stay 150 feet or 200 feet away from the roadway and especially watch that wraparound effect and not to dump snow right on the road. So I just have a few slides here. It shows seeing is believing, so to speak. This is a county road in Watonwan County. So shrub row, deciduous trees, and then a conifer planting. The building site is over here to the left. And certainly the catch row is your first rock, if you will, or your first planting on the windward side, okay? It's going to catch the most snow, and then you drift it into deciduous trees, and hopefully it'll drift in that area where it's not going to cause limb damage and so forth. Look, in this particular picture, I think these are 2 different years. You can almost walk through this particular area. All the snow is gathered in that shrub row and past the shrub row. This is a windbreak coast of Marshall. I think Highway 59, maybe coming out of Marshall, is on the west side. I thought this was a nice building site, a nice building farm shelter belt that they had put together some shrubs, some smaller deciduous trees, and some larger deciduous trees, and then a conifer planting to border the inside of the property. This is down by Spencer. I think it's still in Jackson County, but I took this one year. This is kind of a snow picture here. Obviously, the roadway here, we're looking west, and planted hybrid poplar, and then there's, I think there's rhodosia dogwood here, and then some spruce trees. I think I have an older picture here. That's what it's looked like maybe in the summertime. So he may have to, I haven't been down there for a long time, so I imagine he might have removed some of these, or maybe they've outspent their livelihood and maybe maturity, and then maybe remove some of those, but I imagine these spruce trees are getting bigger as well. This is another nice close-up, I think, by Redwood Falls, showing an indication of how snow is caught by the first planting. So this is rhodosia dogwood. I think might be 2 rows. The trouble is you always want to have snow drift on either deciduous trees like these or maybe shrubs, and then so they can grow back if they get broken down. The trouble is if you have snow drifting on the conifer trees, they do not grow their limbs back, and that can be a problem. But this snow year obviously didn't reach the conifers, and they have actually the inside of the planting is deciduous trees. Okay, so wind gaps, certainly windbreak gaps, you want to kind of fill those with multiple rows or whatever. This is a FEMA site by St. James, and we planted in this site, actually lilacs is the southern part of the row, and actually the northern part of the row is red cedar. So red cedar is dumping snow in fact, let's see, I think it's closer. I don't think that's the planting. I think the lilacs are probably underneath that berm, underneath that drift, okay? But they can grow back, and they have been growing back. It's very nice. A couple of different sections of the highway on 60 was done that way. This is private landowner on Highway 60 near St. James, near the rest area there. I just took a picture of it north. This is north. This is west to the left. And I think 3-year gap between 20 and 23. Certainly we had more snow this last year. And I was concerned about this second row of I think it's red cedars, and that they might lose their limbs, but actually they look pretty good now this summer. So they withstood that freezing and thawing and breaking limbs, and the shrub row is on the outside. So this is a different planting. You probably want to do shrubs on the outside, but this particular planting was 3 rows and seems to be successful. I always want to encourage people to consider some type of, especially a CRP planting, some type of grass planting on either side of the spruce planting or windbreak planting because of the barrier of crops. If farmers are farming right up to the planting, you don't want limbs for deciduous trees or just farming too close to these plantings. So if you can get a CRP program that is grass on either side of the crop. This is a field windbreak, which is in Watonwan County, and a nice conservation farmer that did this. Very nice, and I think he's got some weed mats around them. Might be individual weed mats, but just encourage grass on either side of the planting if it's living snow fence. Okay, MnDOT and U of M research real quickly. 3,700 sites. I'm going to bop over this one because it doesn't have the right information on deaths of Minnesota. Certainly we have a a lot of deaths or some deaths of snow deaths were caused by maybe snow drifting and so forth in Minnesota, and we have a lot of different accidents. Yeah, we may talk about that later. How many remember the year of 1997, January 16th, 1997? Actually, that was after the big snow blow. This is on I-90 near Jackson. I think it's just on the east side of Jackson, right, Dan? If any of you guys travel down to the I-90 corridor to go out west or something from the Twin Cities, you might be taking this route. This is the viaduct. This was plugged, was it for 3 days, Dan? I can't remember now.
That was one of the top 18 sites in Minnesota.
Okay.
For us that went.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. You see a big snow machine there actually blowing on the other, I think the wind might have been blowing to that direction, but blowing on the northbound lane, which is this lane that we're taking a picture of, and then the southbound lane is coming with that coming to the left. Yes, that seemed to be our big snow year, was 96, 97, and actually caused a lot of things to happen. Many of you remember Mark Seeley on campus. He was our climatologist, and he helped develop this with MnDOT staff, Dan Gullickson, and then a contractor or an engineer, actually, Ron Tabler, right? And yeah, so a lot of things happened that year, and we started designing more living snow fences and more snow breaks, snow fences for MnDOT roads and state highways. So this is a 75 FEMA grants, and I think the word on this FEMA grant was, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, I think this was the first time FEMA actually paid for preventative disasters, and not for a disaster, but for prevention of a disaster with living snow fences and so forth.
That is correct.
It's very cool. And we got a lot of those around the state now, 75 of them. During some grant work with MnDOT, the granting with the University of Minnesota, Dean Current, myself, and our forestry team, and with our graduate students, we developed some programs and some research and some surveys of farmers over the years. This was a snow control tools kind of computer program developed at the University of Minnesota. David Smith was our main developer, which is now he's working for USDA. Yeah, I think they still use this and is very, very good. Do you want to say something about that, Dan?
Yeah, that's snowcontroltools.umn.edu. It's housed in the Center for Transportation Studies at the University of Minnesota. And it's just a wonderful website to be able to go get the climate data, which is what you see right here. You can take your icon and click on the location in the state that you are interested in terms of what's the quantity of snow. And so what we look at is we look at how many tons of snow are blowing on us. And from that, we can determine, how tall our fence needs to be and what its offset should be from the road to protect it.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I'll move closer next time. Hopefully people heard that. Okay, great. Okay, great. Yeah, snow controltools.umn.edu. We've got several awards over that. We've been improving it over the years, but it matches up with the DNR's travel and their computer work, and it's very cool. This is a planting, I think this is on 169, right, Dan? South of, is it Belle Plaine? Something like that. And if you're out in rural Minnesota, you probably have seen that. Yeah, so Standing Corn Rows program grew from 17 contracts in 2013 to 43 contracts in 2014. And that was a really nice planting that this farmer, actually, the reason he did this was that I guess he lives close to this area, and he's always pulling people out of the ditch. And so if I can, basically he said to himself, if I can prevent people from getting in the ditch and me getting out in the blizzard conditions, I'm gonna do it. So he did it, and MnDOT pays for that too. And obviously this dozer work to push drifts back, it costs a lot of money with their time and effort. And yeah, so actually then this cost benefit tool at the University of Minnesota that developed with MnDOT justifies the cost of structural snow fences, which over time, obviously this is almost a permanent type fence, really, and we do call it structural permanent fence, $72 per linear foot and purchase permanent snow fences easements. So I think the contract is like 25 feet of easement And then they have these concrete. I've seen the Butterfield one before. These are about 2-foot size circular concrete pillar or concrete footings for this post. And this is poly fence here. It's very effective, and I've taken lots of pictures of those over the years. Very good. If you ever want to comment on anything, Dan, let me know. This is our willows planting. If you're going on Highway 14 south of Waseca, this was planted, gosh, when was this? Several years ago.
2013.
2013, thank you, Dan. This is one of the MnDOT folks, and look at the drift here from these willows. Obviously, these are willows that are growing pretty tall, maybe even tall, maybe too tall and need to be compassed back and regrow. But this is protecting the Highway 14, which is to our left. And yeah, that's in a ditch, that's drifting in a ditch, which is nice. And it's not drifting, blow ice across the top of the road, which is a very high road here. That this is a very steep slope here, and up here is Highway 14. So yeah, very good. And willows is really being popular around the state. And if you've never planted willow sticks before, they're simply about 8 to 10 inches long. It could be a little longer than that. And they actually come from the nursery that they're painted on one end. So green side up, as they say on sod, paint side up on these sticks. You want to make sure you get the paint side up and you see it and the other part in the ground. Sometimes they're hard to get in the ground, but actually graduate students and MnDOT folks are good to get those in the ground pretty easy.
Using just the rebar to create a kind of a hole that will allow that cutting to go into really helps to not damage the stem when you insert it.
Yes, thank you, Dan. I didn't realize that's the rebar there, right?
Yep.
Great, thank you.
And then are they making fresh cuts? Is that what the thing is on the line?
Yes. Yeah.
These must have been, so I don't know if they were too old or
No,
what.
well, what they were doing is they were just making a clean, fresh cut.
Oh, yes.
To help
help
the water.
Yes, got it.
And then you let them sit there for like an hour, and then you can.
Then you plant them.
Yeah.
Got it. Excellent. Yeah, very good. That's what we did at Waseca and several places around the state. Now, I'm using Dan Gullickson's slides from MnDOT. These are MnDOT plantings. I thought they were very nice, and I asked him if I could use them. And in this presentation, the Diablo 9 bark, we're not going to spend a lot of time on these, but 8 to 10 feet tall eventually. But is this year's planting, Dan?
That is from a year ago.
A year ago, okay. But they're very good. Looks very nice. And we were talking earlier with Dan. They're cutting these strips on the weed mats bigger than just an X, like some of the establishment contractors have been doing, or SWCDs, because it's been found that if you don't have a big enough X around the trunk, sometimes the weed mat can girdle the stem and actually kill the tree. So you want to be aware of that when you plant in a weed mat situation. And then they're using P-rock here to put around the stem of the plant, and I think that reduces the mice and voles and stuff. Is that right?
It helps control the weeds. It helps control weeds. It also helps to keep the rodents from getting underneath the geotextile. We only use the geotextile when we're using shrubs. We don't use geotextile if we're planting trees like conifers that are going to get a trunk on them, or deciduous plants that are going to get a big trunk on them. We use wood chip in that setting. But for the lion's share of what we need for blowing snow control, which you had shown in your slide set, is the shrub row that catches the snow. And we really only need about an 8 to 10 foot tall shrub to contain the snow transport that's coming on us based on the past research from the university. And so shrubbery is our workhorse. And this is an example of, trying to reduce the amount of watering and weeding, with the geotextile. It definitely helps reduce the handwork that's needed to establish them.
Super. Thanks, Dan. And you'll notice it looks like different plantings are down further on the row, and MnDOT does a lot of these diversified plantings and multiple species plantings, which is really good for pollinators and wildlife.
And then does the geotextile just remain open like that?
Yes, the geotextile just remains open like that. And as the shrubbery matures, you're going to get canopy closure, and you will no longer see the geotextile.
Very good. I've got some more slides of Dan's here. And this is black chokeberry, glossy black chokeberry, a very high in antioxidant type berry producing plant. You see the berries there already, by golly. And they're edible, humans and wildlife. So that's a shrub that we've promoted for food forest and home landscapes. So it's great to see on the landscape here with MnDOT.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
Is that
Oops.
little, is it like a mat to slow down the water? Is
Right.
that
This
flow?
circular.
Yeah, so what we're seeing there with it's basically just a foam insulation tube that you would get to put on your pipes in your house to
Okay.
keep them from
Got it.
condensation.
Yep.
And what that does is it helps to hold the pea gravel in place, because when you're on a steep slope, when you're watering, you're gonna just wash that pea
Yeah.
gravel away. And this pea gravel is really easy to handle. It rolls off the shovel when you're applying it. And the foam, we only use the foam tube on a slope and staple it in place to hold the pea gravel. And it was actually one of our contractors that came up with this solution. And it's like, you know what, this is working so well. Let's promote it and incorporate it into our details. So
Great.
other contractors are using it now.
Super. Thank you. Good question, Emily. Here's another view of a berm actually on the slope, living snow fence. And this is fragrant sumac. I'm not familiar with this variety. Most sumacs sucker, but this one does not. I heard Dan say.
Yeah, the fragrant sumac is I think one of the best shrubs for catching blowing and drifting snow, because it'll mature out about that 8-foot height. It can tolerate a wide range of soil conditions, from droughty soils. It doesn't like wet feed, so you don't want to be in a wet situation, but it can tolerate salt spray. And so when you're in a situation in an inslope like this, we're going to get some salt spray that's going to be coming off the traffic. And this plant is just fine with it. It doesn't miss a beat when it gets exposed to salt spray.
Great. Thank you. And then this is a double row. You have a planting on the slope here, which is black chokeberry. And then also you have a planting down further down. I think I got another photograph of that right here. So here you see the chokeberry along the bank here, the slope. And then you have on the flat here, that's going to be the first catch row of snow. And the second catch row will be the chokeberry, but this is American plum right here. And then further down, as we talked about, diversify your plantings, American cranberry. And this is on a private land, I think, near Fillmore County, in Fillmore County, and he's used a Conservation Reserve Program, CRP, and this is the planting here, and protect this roadway to the left.
Yeah, and what the landowner's doing there is they didn't want to try to get a piece of equipment between the road and the planting.
Right.
And so they planted that into a snow catch area, planted into native grass, wildflower forbs, and
Nice.
And it really provides that diversity for grassland nesting birds and allows that water from that snowpack to infiltrate that area and just really helps stabilize the soil and reduce soil erosion and provides those other benefits to pollinators and, as I said before, grassland nesting birds.
Very good, Dan. And actually, if you envision this, there's the crop field. So this farmer was probably farming up to the right-of-way with his field, and maybe MnDOT approached him, or he just found a lot of people getting stuck or in the drifts along this highway, and thought it was a good community service project to maybe just take land out of production with CRP, get paid for it, and go for it, and good public value. Real quickly, I got some slides on some of the slides that I show for food forest or for backyard gardening, and that people can produce fruits and nuts from. And obviously, Juneberry, Serviceberry, Saskatoons might be a shrub that might be used in some of these living snow fences as well. I always tell people, if you got kids or grandkids, I recommend two shrubs. The Serviceberry, Juneberry, Saskatoons, because you can pick them off and they're not tart, they're not bitter, they're bitter, they're very good. And then also hazelnuts, you can make your own Nutella. So those are the two shrubs I recommend. Next one is currants. I'm not sure how strong they would be in a snow fence, but certainly can grow pretty tall with that 4 or 5 feet area. It might be a possibility. American plum is being used already, and might need to be composted or cut down if they get too tall, but that's certainly a shrub to look at. Another one is Nanking cherry, certainly edible type berries in that plant. There's your hazelnut, and don't eat the hazelnut right out of the husk. Oh, for you people that want new vocabulary words, the husk is called the involucre. Okay, so a new term to share with your spouse or your kids tonight. Ask them what the husk is on hazelnut. It's called the involucre. I think that's an I word, I think. Sounds German, but I won't get into nationalities here. But yeah, the meat is inside the nut, so the husk protects the nut, and you got to break the nut to get to the meat. So there you go. American cranberry, obviously a very nice plant, wildlife planting. Certainly you make jams and jellies out of. Pretty tart, like almost all the fruits are fresh off the plant. Here's the Aroni berry or black chokeberry that Dan had planted on one of the MnDOT sites as well. Elderberry, I'm not sure elderberry would be strong enough for some of these living snow fences, but certainly maybe with another planting beside it or something might be a possibility. And then honeyberry, just to introduce that, honeyberries are being planted in some local gardens. I'm not sure again how strong they are. They will be a smaller shrub, but certainly a possibility that you may want to use. I want to certainly introduce the Innova tree, the hybrid poplar that was developed at Duluth, at the NRRI, part of the University of Minnesota system, and the Natural Resources Research Institute up there at Duluth. And it does grow tall, so you're not going to use this very close to the road, but certainly if you're looking at a community windbreak that you want to maybe have grow fast, 75 feet, climate zone is 3 to 6, grows up to 10 feet per year, disease resistant, cottonless, it's a cottonless type poplar, has no root sprouts, so that doesn't spread. So it's a kind of a good hybrid poplar, I would say. I know the hybrid kind of gets a bad name sometimes, but because it's not native, but it's a developed variety. This looks like an 8-year picture of the tree, which is pretty cool. We do have a patent pending sale nursery that's selling them. If we have nurseries on the line, certainly contact or sign up for updates on the novatree.umn.edu. If we're looking for nurseries in Minnesota that want to grow this too, so if you're a nursery person or know of a nursery that wants to grow these, we're probably going to be looking for some of those around Minnesota. Resources real quickly. We have our Agroforestry website, certainly extension.umn.edu is our main website for Extension, University of Minnesota, and then we do have an Agroforestry website there. We have a National Agroforestry site, actually National Agroforestry Center at Lincoln, Nebraska, and they have wealth of publications. If you're teaching any classes on windbreaks or snow fences, we have some repair and forest buffers, any of those types of practices, they have publications free of charge. You can order them or download them through PDF. Another university, University of Missouri, it has the Center for Agroforestry down there, and they also have some research and publications available there. Savannah Institute, if you're interested in learning more about agroforestry, that's a nonprofit organization that actually has a spin-off called Canopy for Farm Management that has a nursery in Illinois and in Wisconsin, and they're growing chestnuts, heart nuts, pecans, I believe, no, not pecans, persimmons, and I think pawpaws for northern climates. So that's kind of cool. In fact, recently at Farm Fest at Redwood Falls, Morton, Minnesota, a farmer came up to our University of Minnesota tent and said he's growing pecans in Minnesota. So there you go. I think there is a northern pecan sold at the Iowa DNR nursery. So try it. Don't try 100 of them, but yeah, try a couple and see if they work in your landscape, just for fun. We do have out just recently, released today, is our climate ready trees. Actually, that should be all together. No space there. But our Z-Link climate ready, and then that should get you to the website. Here we have different zones of Minnesota, obviously biomes that coincide with the DNR zones in the state, and have a list of trees that are modeled. They look like through climate models to do well in the future, in 50 years, for 100 years from now. Now, that's not an exclusive list. Don't get me wrong. Things change. There's some trees that are not on that list that are probably going to grow really good in Minnesota. So that's going to be changing all the time, but that's something to look at in the future. MnDOT has a great, let's see, plant selector. Plant selector, just search that. You can look at native types of flowers, native plants, native grasses, sedges, trees, shrubs. They've got a really good website and some fact sheets that go along with it. It's really dynamite. We just, one of the university and MnDOT collaborations and grant programs, we just developed farm maps, farmmaps.umn.edu. And then and I think it'll get to you there without the number sign, but it goes to farmers around the state that are doing living snow fences, standing corn rows, and structural snow fences, and also silvopasture and I think cover crops, actually. So you can actually look at farmers that are doing those practices, and actually it goes into depth of what their farm looks like, what their practice is, where they're located, maybe even a phone number or email address if you want to learn more about their snow fences and farm practices. Again, here's the MnDOT location for Dan Gullickson and his staff around the state by district to contact if we have farmers or landowners interested in living snow fences and with their program. I wanted to end on this. The North Dakota State University come up with a windbreak cookbook. And it could be a living snow fence cookbook, right? So we got aronia berry, we've got wild plum. Here's the Z-Link, NDSU windbreak cookbook. And you can download a PDF and actually maybe be able to order it online too. But elderberry, honeyberries, juneberries, and so forth. I think, oh, here. We're going to end with needs. So future needs real quickly. I know we're getting short on time. I got one more slide, Ryan. So businesses and contractors to plant trees, living snow fences, maybe around the state. Some of our SWCDs, soil water conservation districts, are no longer selling trees and are no longer planting trees and shrubs in their rural landscapes. So I think that's going to be maybe a need in the future. Maintenance contractors to establish and maintain living snow fences or even windbreaks and on these startup years. Watering, pruning, compassing, critter management, etc. And then also nurseries, like we talked about the Innova tree with the hybrid poplar being developed at the NRRI at Duluth, at the University of Minnesota, having a tree there that's a fast-growing tree. We may need nurseries to grow some of these actually climate-ready trees. Believe it or not, in southern Minnesota, they're talking about sycamores and sassafras and persimmons, and we don't have any nurseries that are growing those right now. And so, yeah, be aware of that. Native Minnesota willows can be grown and actually looked at on good projects. Actually, there's several Minnesota willows that could be grown and propagated in Minnesota at nurseries, trees and shrubs that are predicted to do well in climate change, and then suppliers for rural trees and shrubs for SWCDs. Okay, anything to add, Dan? That cover it?
Yeah, I think I think it's really important that we take care of what we plant. And, having, some of these plantings have been in the ground now for 25, 30 years. And that's the beauty of woody plant materials, that it's somewhat self-sustaining. However, you do need to put attention to detail. Are there invasives that are coming in there? Are there volunteer things that are going to outcompete what's there? Can we rejuvenate through the coppice pruning the old dead wood and get a new plant to emerge from that? And these are things that we need to start inventorying and mapping and developing plans to safeguard these investments.
Thanks, Dan. I think I got just one more slide with our contact information. Dan, is that right for your contact information?
That is correct.
Okay. So if you want a PDF of this slide set, I know I rambled through there pretty fast. I can send a PDF to Ryan and he can send it out. I just had 2 fact sheets. We can also put that together. And we've got one that's living snow fences. And then also, this is from the National Agroforestry Center, as I mentioned before. You can have these, you can actually order these free of charge. They just mail them out, box them up, how many you need. And if you're working with communities or even individuals and talking about living snow fences, they're great publications to use. So I think I'm going to close it right there. Ryan? Do we have any questions?
Great, thanks, Gary. So far we just have a comment. Jennifer says NRCS will be adding fruit tree orchards to their EQIP program as a way to prevent soil erosion. they are currently working on developing language for the practice.
Wonderful, Jennifer. Thank you. That's great news. Yeah, and then we're some of my presentations, like Ryan was talking about earlier, that I've presented at Shade Tree Short Course, food forests. We have a great food forest at Laverne, Minnesota, of all places, and then there's many in the cities now being developed. So if you have a community that's interested in food forests, there's a nonprofit food forest. I think it's called Project Food Forest out at Sioux Falls, South Dakota, actually, that you can find out more information, or reach out to me and I can help you contact with others that have dabbled in that and give you some suggestions. Very cool.
I have a few questions if I can start.
Yes, go ahead.
Particularly, I'm wondering if you mentioned conifers quite a bit, and I'm guessing a lot of those just looking kind of seems like spruce.
Yes.
Are you seeing spruce diseases pop up over time? Because
Yes.
they all look fairly densely
Yes.
planted.
Yes. We have two needle cast diseases in spruce, and I mentioned spruce mainly on the farm site shelter belts versus a shrub living snow fence. So we probably are not going to see spruces on living snow fences. But we have two main needle cast diseases in spruce. The old one was Rhizosphere needle cast disease, and now the new one is stigmina. So I've not recommended Colorado blue spruce for 35 years, and I've recommended, on the other side of that, I've recommended Black Hill spruce for 35 years. Well, now, Rhizosphere did not affect Black Hill spruce, but now stigmina affects Black Hill spruce. I've seen one windbreak in Mountain Lake, browning from the base needles, from the lower branches, browning needles from the base up in 3 years, taking a 30, 40-foot tree. So it's really devastating, and that's, if you can imagine, 30 years of planting Black Hill spruce in southwestern Minnesota, that's almost going to be as devastating as our green ash demise with the emerald ash borer. So we're recommending, maybe because they haven't been planted a lot of, Norway spruce and Meyer spruce. If you're looking at some type of spruce planting in your area, we're saying that those have not shown any needle cast diseases. Now, one might say that they aren't planted enough of them out on the landscape to show that, right? But we're saying we start with those instead of planting Colorado blue spruce or Black Hill spruce. Sorry about that. Yeah, and there might be some more spruce varieties coming online maybe later, but right now Norway and Meyer spruce. We're glad you brought that up. That's a major concern out here in rural areas. Yeah. Cool.
Another question. So I'm wondering, with the addition of plants and food sources for wildlife along roadways, do you see more wildlife mortality coming in conflict with cars?
I'll let Dan answer that. I'm not sure if there's been a lot of studies on that, but yeah.
Yeah, we had an informal study just looking at crash data. This was probably 15 years ago, looking at deer crashes. And they couldn't find anything conclusive that there was a trend that was causing that. A lot of it is, location. And a lot of our living snow fence plantings themselves might only be 1,000 feet long. So you might have 1,000 feet here and you go several miles, and then you might have another 1,000 feet. So we don't typically have, these interconnected that create these corridors for wildlife in that aspect of it. So with that, I think that it's something to always be mindful of, looking at the landscape. Are there areas where you can kind of see where there might be a natural deer passageway that might be happening in those areas? It might be areas that you may want to, avoid a standing corn rows or avoid a living snow fence. Especially, you wouldn't want to plant any of the arborvitae in that situation, because that'd be just like deer candy for them. You wouldn't probably even have a snow fence because the deer will have it mowed.
Yeah.
And then in those situations, then, looking at the possibility of incorporating structural snow fencing that may even act as, if you could even maybe design in a manner that could kind of direct the deer to maybe get out of harm's way, is some things that could potentially happen if you have like an underpass that they can actually get underneath the road, similar to what we have on Highway 14 in the Dodge Center area.
Dan, I can see almost maybe more potential for casualty crashes with deer in the summer months where you might have some fruits and nuts, but then that might be a barrier to keep them off the roadway that says, hey, if I'm satisfied here, I'm not going to cross the roadway. I'm going to just walk down this line and go back to the woods. Or go back to the field. But yeah, very good.
I have a question related to the shrub size.
Sure.
When you're doing these large expanses, it gets expensive, I'm sure. What's the minimum size that you usually start out with for the planting stock? Because you don't want it to be too small or it'll get nibbled up in a second.
Yeah, and so in MnDOT, we typically use a lot of bare root plant material. And with the bare root plant material, looking at about that 18-inch height, 18 to 24-inch height, seems to be a pretty readily available height, and it's got enough substance to it, enough root mass that they do seem to take quite well. So that's kind of the magic height, is getting around that 18-inch height.
Okay.
Dan, we've got one video left. Shall we show this? Well, not one left. We haven't shown one. Let's see if it comes up here. Now, I don't know if we have to click on something to get it to go. What do you think? Ryan, let's see. How about this? This is along Highway 60 between Mountain Lake and, well, there we go. Mountain Lake and Windham. It's a structural snow fence. You see blowing snow across the road. Here's the structural snow fence right there. It starts there. Notice the less drifting is blowing snow. There you go. Look how tall these drifts are. They are like 10, 12 feet tall. And then the snow fence ends right here. And notice the blowing snow. That cool? Seeing is believing. If you've not driven on these roads before, there you go. I think it'll stop. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
So on this video, it was the wind is coming from this direction.
This is the north. This is going west. We're driving west.
Okay.
Yes, this is the north side of the road. Yep, you're right. Yeah,
And then,
Emily?
so it just topples over the side
Yes,
of the fence.
yes.
Okay.
And it will, Dan and I were at one site in Butterfield, and I think we could almost walk close to the fence because it blows underneath the fence. But the drift is right here, right 2 feet away. It goes to maybe 6 or 8 feet tall. I mean, it's just bellowing the snow. It's really cool how that works. Very cool.
And so maybe, and sorry if I missed this, but so in terms of the homeowners kind of revenue, so as a landowner, you could get paid for the establishment or subsidize the cost of establishment?
Yes.
Or is there an annual?
Well, if it's a CRP payment, if it's a CRP Conservation Reserve Program plan, that's a 10-year, 15-year contract, and you get cash rent every year for those number of years that you sign up for the contract. And actually, MnDOT has some agreements too to work with those farm families that do that with NRCS for maintenance or something. There's a little add-on incentive. So there is some money involved. So yes, it's almost cost effective, I'd say. It's almost basically cash rent. They get cash rent for basically almost a semi-permanent planting, and then they get, hopefully, it's been in the past that they've extended that contract even after the first 15 years. They've extended it another 15 years. So there's 30 years right there, and then the next generation might extend it too.
And so, like MnDOT's cost participation with one of the research projects that we had with Gary and his team, and working with District 7, Gordy Regenscheid was the maintenance engineer at the time, and his comment was, I'm paying for blowing snow control. I'm not paying for ears of corn. So the standing corn row program really, it's the stocks that we want. And so with that methodology and that thought process, we're paying for blowing snow control. Corn is commonly grown across Minnesota, especially in the areas where we need blowing snow control. And so our payment structure is really based on the price of corn. And as a result of the research here with Gary, it figures out to be about $1 to $1.50 per lineal foot is what they would get paid. And so whether you're growing corn out there, which you then have to buy the seed each year. You have to buy the fertilizer. You got to put the chemical down to control the weeds. Or you could do a living snow fence or a structural snow fence and not have that annual input cost of the seed, corn. We're interested in blowing snow control. And so we look at whether it's standing corn rows or a living or structural snow fence. Our payment that would be in conjunction with, let's say, Conservation Reserve Program would mirror that effort. And the other thing is when the Conservation Reserve Program is at play, those are federal funds. And so we have to make sure that we're using our state funds to be that participation.
Sure.
So it's not federal on federal in that regard. So it's something that, we've been doing this really since, Gary, that winter of 96, 97.
Yeah.
We formed that interagency committee, developed the guidebook, and from there, we developed that partnership with USDA and working with private landowners to have this success.
And Dan, just to mention to Ryan and Emily here, we've got some farmers that will actually put a strip of corn in their soybeans field to actually participate in this program. I know that mountain lake picture that I showed you on Highway 30, that farmer does that. So he rotates and has a strip of corn, and maybe two. In fact, I think one farmer has two strips, a catch row and one 12 row out there, and then he farms in between their soybeans and then corn again. So it's pretty interesting. I think there's one at Owatonna area that does that every year. Pretty awesome.